Good morning. Let me first thank the organizer for their kind invitation to open this session. And let me also express my deep regret for not being able to be live on Zoom. But I can assure you that I am in spirit and intention with you in this distributed new world now we live in. The title of my presentation is Coping with a Crowded Habitat, Homo as Prey, Predator, and Imitator. And I think that we have to underline the word imitator. As far in the past as we can imagine the lives of members of the genus Homo, the only fact that is unquestionable is that these lives were entangled with the lives of many other species, small and large, that saturated the environment. Surviving predators while catching prey was a constant challenge. Now, to make my point more vividly, let me refer you to the recent discovery in the Guattari cave near Rome of the fossilized remains of 9 Neanderthals who had been butchered by hyenas. In another hyena den, in the Jirsan lava tube cave in northwestern Saudi Arabia, huge heaps of bones that included many human skull caps were found among other animal remains. The species of striped hyenas that have been identified as the responsible predators has been around for much longer than hominids on the surface of the earth. As contemporary data show, hyenas are not exclusively scavengers, but are wont to hunt in packs against which no single individual can prevail. We can see examples on YouTube of films which were done in Africa by cameras, and you can see that a single individual has no chance. And that is, of course, is for hominids a big incentive to be in groups. Hyenas, of course, are only one of many other predators that are well equipped to overcome humans. This entails consequences for the way in which we can represent the mere physical survival of individuals and groups, but it also constitutes a determining factor for the social and cognitive evolution of humanity. Focusing on the animate environment of early humans has a marked advantage over the exclusive examination of the archaeological records that provide evidence concerning the material culture. The dynamic relation to earth, water, and even fire was necessarily mediated by the observed behavior of animals. The scientific knowledge that can be derived from artifacts such as stone tools and rock art is necessarily limited to elementary practical tasks of fabrication and inferred use. But any cultural interpretation, everybody agrees, can be only hypothetical with various degrees of plausibility. Now, all cultural productions, either technological or ideological, are indeed subject to unpredictable variations that may remain forever elusive. By contrast, it can be safely assumed that the behavior of the animal species that populated the environment of the genus Homo in the course of its evolution had already reached considerable anatomical and behavioral stability, and thus can provide a robust reference to the context of long past event. We should factor the fact, so, that altricial species, that is, the species in which the young needs the education of the progenitor to be able to survive. There are species like, let's say, turtles, they hatch from their eggs and then they rush to the sea, and those who escape the birds can survive and reproduce. But for tigers, for lions, for hyenas, for humans, if a baby, a newborn, does not have the presence of the parents and their presence during the development of this new being, then they have no chance of survival. So we should factor the fact, this is why we should factor the fact that altricial species are prone to develop cultures that may evolve within the boundaries of their instinctual behavior. From insect to predators, the paleontological and paleographic records offer robust evidence of the kind of information early humans could process through observation and the sort of vital challenges they had to negotiate in order to survive. They witness, as we do today, migrating wildebeest and reindeers, as well as hunting wolves, bears, lions, and hyenas, for which they were natural prey. They also witness industrious insects, birds, and mammals, whose behavior was even more predictable than meteorological events. By focusing on what is very unlikely to have significantly changed during the last 100,000 years and more, we can learn a lot about the constraints and affordances of the animated environmental that selected the physical aptitudes, cognitive competencies, and cultural behavior of early humans towards the material elements that form their environment. Entirely depending for survival from information coming from species that populate the proximal and distal surroundings is a strong incentive for observing and remembering their behavior in the form of anecdotes and developing appropriate skills transmitted from generation to generation. Natural selection can only favor those who can anticipate the behavior of relevant species, both prey and predators, and are able to represent in a way or another their usual strategies. That's why it's very important to point out that the emergence of the theory of mind, and as you know, theory of mind means the capacity to imagine the point of view of other organisms, both conspecifics and others, and to anticipate their actions. This possibility, this adaptation is a crucial adaptation. It is the first step toward analogous thinking, anthropomorphism, and deliberate imitation. The brain of the genus Homo, like the brain of some avian and cetacean species, evolved the capacity of both producing articulate sounds and imitating other species' acoustic signals, a capacity that is which often includes the imitation of dynamic behavior, both practical and expressive. What I mean is that the competence which allows the acoustic imitation goes hand in hand with the capacity to imitate dynamic behaviors and, as I suggest right now, in anticipation of the rest of my talk, including the reshaping of the environment. The permanent or temporary transformation of the environment as an adaptive behavior is a noticeable characteristic of many species, from insect to ape. So we know that a niche can exploit the natural protective affordances of its natural landscape on any scale, from the small recesses on high cliff in which baboons sleep overnight out of the reach of the leopards, and also to the very small holes in tree trunks for some birds and rodents to seek shelter. But the living space of the abode can be deliberately reshaped so that it can provide relative safety for sleeping or raising offsprings, as well as protecting from temperature extremes, as the birds constantly have shown us. Termites, bees, birds, and beavers, for example, provide striking example of organisms that transform their immediate environment by constructing structures with stones, mud, and branches, or dig burrows to ensure their day-to-day survival. But it might still be more critical to focus on primates whose motor and cognitive competencies are closer to Homo. We know that every evening, chimpanzees construct elaborate nests to spend the night high in trees away from predators. Various architectural techniques have been observed across groups to the extent that their behavior is considered to be as much cultural as instinctual, since distinct methods are transmitted from the chimpanzee mother to their offspring. And I have made a slide with the various architecture when you see that some chimpanzee have the culture of bending the branches in various ways so that they form a solid basis. Other ones are using the angle of the branches and they pile up branches and leaves so that to create a sort of mattress, if I can say. Other ones have other ways of constructing with branches that they make fit into each other as a sort of basket. And so these, it has been shown, are the technique is transmitted, the technique of shaping the environment, shaping the space, is transmitted from the mother to the youngs, to the infants. Of course, bipedalism has certainly transformed the relation of Homo to space, but has not necessarily cancelled the building culture of the arboreal common ancestor. I mean, there was a drive already there, because the common ancestor, obviously, to survive, had also to build nest, to build resistant nests in the trees. Also, of course, with trees, we cannot have any archaeological record of these vegetable architecture. Now, additional challenges, so, had to be addressed. Evolution brings small adaptive variations at a time, but the fauna and flora context remain the major source of selection, an independent variable that we can safely assume has not much changed over the last 100,000 years, as the archaeological record shows. This is the common denominator that links the culture of hunter-gatherers and Neolithic settlers. Both had to cope with the same animals, and both has to reshape, but the Neolithic settler more urgently, their their special surroundings in order to cope with these animals. As it has been often noted, this marked the advent of the Anthropocene. That is the beginning of permanent changes brought about by human industry to the physical environment in order to make it more suitable to human need. Other species have shown the way. We are prone to marvel at human industrious inventiveness. The remodeling of space through recombining earth, wood, stones, and using water and fire in the process is certainly adaptive, at least in the short or medium term. However, all adaptation has a cost. It entirely depends on the stability of the context that first determine each steps of natural selection. Adaptation can be so cumulative that they modify the environment to such an extent that they create new artifactual selection pressure. This is known as the Baldwin principle, the fact that whatever is produced by culture can constitute new context which exists, which impact the natural selection process. Evolution is necessarily short-sighted. It favors immediate survival. In adaptation, which would be for valid potentially in 1 century, has no chance if it does not allow the organism to survive the night. So that's why we can say that evolution is necessarily short-sighted. It favors immediate survival. The human brain and its cognitive competencies have evolved in a way that obtains immediate payoff. It can project and anticipate through planning and imaginations, but only to a limited horizon that may appear irrelevant at the time of this adaptive process. This is the way all species that evolve the skill to reshape their living space proceed. They ultimately destroy or impair the environment of other species and their own. This is a bit, I would say, pessimistic view, but this is exactly what we are experiencing right now in the Anthropocene. Of course, the extreme case of the beavers is symptomatic. They transform the landscape into a watery wasteland, and there would be no end to it if their demographic were not curtailed by diseases and predators, including humans, who eradicated them in some parts of the planet. Ultimately, if the beavers had their way, there would be no tree left and no streams to be dammed. And maybe that is what's happening to us. Anyway, let me continue and go further. In many respects, marveling at the way humans have reshaped their living space is like marveling at the beavers' building skills. Therefore, when we describe the reshaping of space that we identify in the archaeological record, we should consider this transformation not only as homocentric cultural achievement, but also as steps toward unpredictable or at least unanticipated consequences. To conclude, it is reasonable to speculate that Homo inherited from the common ancestors of the primates a propensity to modify their proximal environment. The outcome of this drive was susceptible to cultural variations because its practical implementation was in large part cultural, since infants must learn from the parents the particularities of their environment constraints and the best local way to adapt to them. Once cognitive evolution made deliberate imitation and innovation possible. The original drive diversified thanks to the input that were derived from the observation and imitation of other species. And that's what I want to on what I want to insist, the observation and imitation of other species, because we cannot avoid to be sure, to be absolutely sure that these our ancestors, Neanderthals and others and so on, they had to observe because that was a matter of survival. They had to observe. And then when they had the capacity of imitating, then they could develop a lot of interesting things like pottery, like many insects, weaving like many birds, and so on and so on. And the imitation, the observation and imitation of other species. The progressive elimination of predators and the securing of prey through domestication prompted the unchecked reshaping of space with exponential efficiency to the point that the global transformation of the planet may prove to be tragically maladaptive for Homo and a host of other organisms. That is the reflection on which I will conclude this paper. And we can get both some information about our own development by looking at other animals' development. And also there may be a moral lesson to be derived from these examples. Remember the beavers. Thank you very much.